Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us on Head Inside Mental Health, featuring conversations about mental health and substance use treatment with experts, advocates, and professionals from across the country, sharing their thoughts and insights on the world of behavioral health care. Broadcasting on WPBM 1037, the voice of Asheville, independent commercial-free radio. I'm Todd Weatherly, your host, therapeutic consultant, behavioral health expert. I am here today with Mr. Vince Benevito. Vince is the director and founder of Causeway Collaborative, providing direct service for all three specialized teams. A licensed professional counselor, he holds BA in psychology from Wesleyan University and an MA in school counseling from Fairfield University. Same as my wife, but here in the Carolinas, actually. Vince began his career as an in-home therapist for adolescents and families at the Wheeler Clinic in Plainville, Connecticut, a regional behavioral health services provider. From there, he entered the corporate world where he worked as a professional recruiter and honed career counseling skills. With these valuable experiences, Vince transitioned back to individual and community-based counseling as an employment specialist at the Kennedy Center, one of Connecticut's largest, most highly regarded community organizations. At the Kennedy Center, Vince worked to find meaningful jobs for unemployed adults with psychiatric diagnoses and criminal histories. I did the same for the community college in our area. This is going to be a fun conversation. He joined Freudman and Billings in the 2010 as educational therapist, completed a year-long internship in the Weston High School Guidance Department, reinitiated and co-led weekly support groups for at-risk students in 2012. Vince has brought all these skills together and experiences to start the Causeway Collaborative, which serves young men who are transitioning and needing to find their way, probably in recovery from not only mental health disorders, but also substance use disorders, needing that coaching support and vocational support there in the local community in Connecticut, and with a team of trained professionals, coaches, and therapists that help them find their way after they've come out of residential treatment. Is that a pretty accurate description, Vin?
Yeah, that's pretty right on. That's
well, and I'll say this: you and I got connected through a doc that we both know and appreciate. Yeah. Who's in Dr. Santo Pietro is a highly regarded psychiatrist in the area, and he can't say enough about you guys. Yeah. We've got at least one client coming your way and have started working together a little bit. I got to tell you, as a person who started an organization that's got some similarities in the local area and then handed it off to the therapist that's there, like what you guys are doing we need so much more of it.
Thank you. Yeah,
we just need so much more of it, because young men and women, they need this kind of support. I always say that it may be one of the most vulnerable times you have is coming out of residential treatment. So that step down transitional step is really important. The next most vulnerable time, and maybe even more vulnerable, is when you actually step back into like the apartment and your own space, and you've got all the stuff on you now.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, more people crumble at that time than any other time. And it literally, I don't understand how insurance companies have skipped this component of care, what they often do. But like, if you will, it looks like you've done a lot of, a ton of this, like working with adolescents, working in school systems, working in educational environments, corporate environment. Yeah. So you've got jobs in there, education in there. I mean, all the component pieces. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you blended all this stuff together and created Causeway Collaborative. What gave you the gumption to do that? Because it's not an easy job.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. And thanks for all the praise. So, I mean, I think, first and foremost, my vision for the organization came out of my own personal experiences. I was the guy who struggled mightily with, mental health and substance use, throughout the course of my, latter teens and into my 20s. And, there was a couple pieces of it that really formed, the ethos of who we are. One, I was as treatment resistant as anybody you could ever meet. So I really became curious and fascinated by the idea of want to be worked with, and like finding ways to engage guys who were really hard to reach and didn't really respond to other service providers prior. Kind of became preoccupied with that specific population. I also was, this is a long time ago, when I was in college. This is over, it's about 20 years ago now, but like I was fascinated by the lack of support specifically for young men. like men and young men. Like there wasn't anything, that was focused on men's issues or young men's issues or, issues around, educational support or where do I find a job or where do I do this? I mean, I think, I also wasn't one of like the super motivated kind of guys to go out and like proactively look for help. Like help had to come and find me a little bit late in the game. And so, I wanted to be a part of a solution that was providing, greater access for, men and young men to care, that was providing services that were like therapeutic, but not specifically limited to couch therapy or talk therapy, which I think for some guys is, something that they're not really readily able to engage in.
Kind of limited success from it.
Yeah. Right? And like, just, they don't want to do it, sometimes.
Well, they're good at fronting.
Yeah, they're good at front. And I say that only because like I was too.
Right.
So I think that was a core piece that resonated with me. And honestly, there was unique attraction for me about the idea of, older men pouring into young men and, sharing stories and, having perspective and providing wisdom, but, in the ways that I think, male specific work can be particularly impactful. So.
Have you collaborated at all or know anything about the Journeyman Foundation? Have you done anything with those guys before or know about them?
Don't know anything about those guys.
Similar idea, not a program per se, more like, forms groups, free groups for young men and, gives them the opportunity to kind of get under the layer and get a little deeper with how they're connecting with others that, either peers or older adults, but very much centered around exactly what you're saying. How do we bring back, and, rites of passage is a big piece of it and all those other things, but how do we bring back kind of this elder guidance as a part of an adolescent's life, and dads are one thing, that's true, right. But they, as a dad of two teenagers, I know I can't be everything. Like, and if you look at the kind of child development stuff, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, we know that the source of their information and the source of their guidance and a lot of the stuff that channels their maturity is largely as they grow into older teens from their peers. Absolutely. From their social groups, not from their family.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if you can spice that with something that's got actual real like knowledgeable guidance to it, like that's the trick. And it sounds like that's what you're accomplishing.
Yeah.
I want to, if you will, one or a congregate of individuals that you've worked with. Yeah. Give me a tough nut to crack story, if you would. I'd love to just your experience with one that just comes out in your mind. I know they're all kind of, you don't do easy work. They're all kind of tough, but I know there's a couple of shiners out there,
Yeah. So, there's so many great stories over the years, guys who, and guys we've had these like long and winding roads with, got a guy, I'll leave the name out. This kid came to me at 15 years old, post Karen, for, pretty severe substance use issues, pretty traumatic family constellation. Parents were split. There was some abuse with mom's new domestic partner. Dad had a new girlfriend. He was a, C-suite guy. So, lot of open space for this kid to like find ways to get himself into trouble. And he
and plenty of money, I'm sure.
Yeah, plenty of money, plenty of access, not a lot of oversight. So it's a pretty messy cocktail there. Came back from Karen, came back into us and under our care and, relapsed pretty quick. And so we sent him right back. He did okay for a couple years, and honestly, look, it's a really, as you know, Todd, it's a, for a 15-year-old kid to come back and get sober and stay sober is a very, very tall order, right? So, this kid did really well for a couple years. And then, about 18 years old, went sideways, relapsed, got really bad for a couple of months. And now, and we sent him away again, finally got cleaned up for good. So fast forward now, this guy's 22, 23, comes in, once every 6 weeks, once every 4 to 6 weeks to see me just for a check-in. But, working in a construction job as project manager, making 65, 70 grand, no college, 55 hours a week. And, actually started up his own little business on the side in addition there too. And all the while, we've been doing work alongside him, for years,
Right.
Through our mentorship program, getting him on a regimen, having him work out, doing wellness-based stuff, helping him feel good. Doing a little socially focused work where, we're trying to he wasn't a 12-step guy. So we had to work overtime to get him connected with positive things that weren't substances. And then working him and the family in the counseling process for a couple of years on end. So, long road for a guy like that. We lost some, we won some, but the story was a happy ending at the end of the day. So,
well, it's not, like they say, it's not a linear path
no.
to recovery. And, I know that people have this, I've heard people really have a problem with, like, relapse as part of recovery. I'm like, I get why we don't like that statement. And I think that there's an important resistance to having that statement be true that comes from people who are working in recovery. I would say, however, that, like, the process of self-discovery is not a linear path, and it comes with some interesting turns. And sometimes, especially as a young man, you definitely stumble. And stumbling looks different for everybody,
100%.
because even a person who is, in recovery and successfully sober is not necessarily successfully recovering. They pour all of that into a work, and then they crash, or they pour it into a relationship that's unhealthy, or they do all these other, counter addictions, if you will, that cause that aren't any better for their life. Or they're miserable because they don't know, they haven't found anything that causes them to feel good and a place to have community and do the things that cause a person to have a fulfilling and meaningful life, the one that they want. And if you will speak to this, because I've said this, I've been saying this for years. We get, and I think recovery's guilty of it, treatment's guilty of it, and it unintentionally, but it's societal. So you go to school. And hopefully you finish school, or you finish some version of it, and you graduate, right? Like, there's this celebration, and they give you a certificate, and you're like, and then, and it's a falsehood, like you've completed something, and that feels good, and that's great, but in many ways, it's almost like, with having kids, like, it's almost like pregnancy, You freak out that you're pregnant, when your wife's pregnant with your child, and they're coming along the way, and then that child is born. It's like, pregnancy that wasn't nothing. That was just conceptually preparing me for the idea of what the real deal was. Now
you turn the page, right? That's all that. Yeah, that's all. And
it's like, I think that celebrating markers is good. But they in recovery, they call it 13 months. More people relapse on their year anniversary than almost any other time. Like, in your work, how do you navigate this? And I want to tell you that this is not like, this is the rest of your life, by the way. What we're doing here, I know you feel good and it's successful. And we've built some stuff and it's great. And for the rest of your life, you're going to be attempting to manage a version of this. How do you get that message across? Because somewhere you have to, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, for us to, that begins with the family, I think, and cultivating a narrative with the family of one of not only transparency, but sort of progression, like transparency around, like, establishing reasonable expectations that make sense and that, people can kind of co-align to. I think what happens most often with us is that mom and dad are over here and kids kind of over here. And, like, we start, out of the blocks with, party A and party B not being on the same page. So I think, the conversation, I think, begins with, like, what are we actually trying to do? And what do hey, kid, kid's 23 now, right? So, Johnny, like, what's your vision for your life? Here. Yeah. What's your vision for your life, and where are we headed? And then making sure that the parents understand that and are, to some degree on board with that. Right. And if they're not on board with it, that's okay. But let's have the conversation up front and just kind of rescope expectations. So it always begins with expectations. And then from there, I think I just encourage transparency. I encourage men, to really be purposeful about sharing their resistance. If you think something sucks, it's necessary that I know about it so we can pivot and go in a different direction. And
Right.
it doesn't do any good for someone to tell me that they're on board with a plan and we start working a plan for 3 to 6 months only to find out that it's not the right plan and he did it begrudgingly the whole time or whatever the case may be. So it's important to, look forward, be transparent, me to be on the same page with a guy as somebody who's working to serve him and trying to work on his behalf. And really lastly, that the vision is his, that it's not dad's and he, just is parakeeting it, and it's not, mom's, his father's, whatever. Like this is a young man's or a man's vision for his own life. And we're stepping forward because we believe that that's what he knows is best for him.
And you have to impart the crushing news to the parents that, hey, this box that you've tried to put your adult child in, your adult son in, he may not meet that.
That's correct.
It may not be his dream at all. And in order for him to live something that looks successful, it may or may not meet your idea of success, and you may need to come off of it entirely. Like, because if we start aiming for a goal that's not his, but instead yours, it's doomed to fail in the first place. You're going to be right back in the same spot you were in.
Yeah, because the guy's never going to run with it if it's not his.
No.
He'll fake it for a little while, but it's going to be revealed eventually that it's being forced on him, and we're going to have to pivot anyway. So,
well, there's also I don't know what your experience as a young man with. I can pick out pieces of mine, and it wasn't necessarily that either of my parents had some overbearing idea of success about who I needed to be, but they definitely had ideas about what success looked like.
Sure.
And so I spent a part of my life trying to meet those ideas, even though they were not mine. And then I would succeed at them and be miserable. Yeah. And be like, this sucks. How did I do this? And I think that process is difficult. I'm glad I had versions of support and things that I did to kind of like, let me navigate this and figure out who I am and what I want to do. But like for a young man, especially if they've gotten addiction in their background or, something that looks like fairly significant mental illness and mental health challenges in their background and familial dynamics that throw into all those things that can get very overbearing. I can imagine that that's like probably one of the toughest things to face and terrifying at the same time. It's like, oh my God, I have no idea who I am or what I want to be. It's easy for me to just sign on for a co-opted plan of somebody else's than it is for me to come up with my own. Yeah. Right. So maybe that's I'm certain that you run into this with these guys, right? It's like, well, my dad said, or whatever, well, I just want to go out and be this successful thing. It's like, I hear that and I don't buy it. It sounds like BS to me. Like, tell me about that conversation when you have it with guys.
Yeah, I think, I think my approach has changed with respect to this.
I'll
tell you why.
I want to hear this.
I'll tell you why. Yeah, I think a few years ago, when I was younger, and I was a little less patient, maybe, like I would just fire right back, and immediately, poke holes and deconstruct and well, here's why that's a terrible idea. A, B, C, D, E. Right. And now, and I think this is a much better approach. I will always allow the guy to engage me in demonstrating why his plan is going to work. Right. And reserve judgment. So this is a hilarious story, but we had a guy one time who came through. He might have been 5'2", 5'3", maybe. And he told me that his vision was to go to the NBA. Right. And so like, rather than metaphorically dunk on him, I decided to say, okay, well, I know a little bit about basketball, not a lot, much as a fan, not as a player, but, why don't we take a look at like Kobe's training regimen and see what guys who are playing in the high level are doing, on a daily basis. And, we got through about day one of, 2,000 jump shots and, 300 push-ups before you start your day. And he tapped out pretty quickly and said, hey, you know what, we should probably go look at doing something else with our time. So, honestly, it was, acquainting him with data and evidence around what was required and demonstrating the incongruence between what was required and what he could do, that helped him get there himself.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of letting things set their own limit.
That's right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, well, I like that idea. I'm not going to say this in my mind. I'm like, I've got a pretty good idea that that's going to set its own limit, because you're going to get about a third through the process, and it's going to be something that you don't want to do. That'd be my guess, but I'm going to let that play out. Like the other one, Socrates, he called it intellectual midwifery. And he would, like, let somebody talk through and just, so you're saying this, but also this. They sound like they are in conflict with one another. Can you explain that a little further? And then the person would, like, they'd work their way down to tripping through it and realize
trip all over themselves.
It was a completely incongruous kind of ideology that they had formulated. Like, I think that I mean, it's beautiful work. Not only is it something that allows a person to arrive somewhere, but it also teaches them a thought process.
Absolutely.
Which, I in so many times, in just following impulse after impulse, they've never really engaged in.
Right.
Now, with adolescents,
sure.
This one's you've got a lot of experience with adolescents, and classroom work and education work and everything else. Yeah. And one of your stories, you start with a guy at 15. And obviously there was stuff that had, his story had some dips.
No doubt. Mm-hmm.
What's the difference in your mind overall in finding a message that lands with a 15, 16-year-old versus with a 23, 24-year-old?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think, I think for me, it's about relatability and connecting with people, and I think, this work is helping somebody navigate their own journey, and I think if you create a space for a guy of any age to do that in a way that allows him to open himself up, and with approachability and respect and care, I think it can work, irrespective of age and really irrespective of personality. I've got some, very, very unlikely pairings. If I walk back through the annals of, like, the client relationships that I've had, some of my favorite clients I've ever had have been some of the, most unlikely pairings between myself and they. But I think it's exactly that. It's not trying to overextend, not working too hard to try to force a connection, when it's not there, when common interests aren't shared. Right. I think that it's, applying all the skills that we all try to do to do good work, being empathic, being kind, being relatively level. I'm a little more emotional than the next guy. So that's the watch out for me. I always have to watch injecting myself too much into the conversation or allowing my, highs and lows to peak too much. But I think if you abide by those principles, if you are careful, if you are honest, if you're transparent and respectful, and if you allow yourself to be yourself, you can do pretty well.
I think to me, that's kind of the big thing. It's like, you and I are probably the same about it. Very unlikely I can be anything other than myself, and trying is painful. So
yeah, I don't know how, actually.
I don't have any idea how to do something. Like, I watch things where people try to, comedians will talk about it, or somebody, actors or whatever, be something that isn't them. And I'm like, that looks incredibly painful. I wouldn't last 5 minutes. So now let me switch that question up, for you and me, or for you and the work that you're doing, like, a little bit of vulnerability, certainly genuineness and authenticity, showing up and having a connection. Like, that's a great answer. Thanks, Vince.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
If you instead of you're a parent.
Okay.
How does a parent, like, I think I get asked this question a lot. I've got some answers in my head. I'd love to hear yours. Like, how does a parent approach the the I know everything 16, 17-year-old versus the different version of I know everything 21, 22, 23-year-old
Yeah. Yeah.
that's having struggles or that's going through something.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question too. I mean, it's a scope of the role conversation, I think, right? So, like, 16, 23. I mean, 23, that guy should be independent or moving towards, absolutely has far more degree of command of his life than, a 15, 16-year-old. If he doesn't, we got bigger issues, So, I mean,
Right.
I think as a parent, you have to know that the scope of your role is far more limited and far more consultative, right? Like, guys are coming to you, your sons are coming to you, your daughters are coming to you because, for advice, direction, insight, but the heavy lifting should be over by that point. At 15, 16, you're right in the throes of heavy lifting.
Yeah,
Now,
that's for sure.
my kids are younger, 10, 12, 8. But we're even experiencing it, with especially my oldest. So my oldest is going to middle school, right? And we're in a cool time with him now because this summer was the first time where like the world became his, so he got his little gizmo watch, he got his bicycle, and now him and his brother, they go, 10 o'clock.
Ride.
Mom will see you later. Come home 6:30. And they got their watches. And if their mother needs them, they call, she calls. Right. So, I mean, I think even there's some discomfort for me and her for sure. Like, it's, out of sight, out of mind is hard, especially because this is the first time going through it. But if you kind of see, our vision for our children are that, we work to help them become better independent versions of themselves. Right. And I believe that, a bicycle and a watch gets him closer to that than him being at home, where he's under my watchful eyes. So
Right.
it's important for, I think, parents to, as that world expands, right? Because 16 is bigger than 12 and 23 is bigger than 16. As their world expands, we have to shrink our own role to allow them the space to step in. So
Yeah, I think the discomfort piece is where it falls apart sometimes for parents. And I have my own pitfalls as a parent. I will fully acknowledge them, but I've got a 20-year-old going to college, and I've got a 17-year-old got his first car.
love it.
So, we're in two different launching places, but they're versions of independent launching.
No doubt.
And it's like I don't know. I think the car's harder than college, to be honest with you. Like giving them the car and letting them drive off by themselves for the first time.
Oh,
It's like terrifying.
I
Honestly,
can
as a
imagine.
person who does not experience terror very often,
Sure.
terrifies me.
Sure.
So, but it's like, and how else is he going to go and do these things if I don't let him go do them? And then they come back and they, there's a little trouble here, there's something else, or they get a ticket, or the things they happen, they come up. And then you try to deal with them as a parent. I think that it's when you and I are working with individuals who are, one, they suffer from some challenges in the first place, so they've gotten into trouble, and it's addictions and mental illness, but those things will throw a maturity process off hands down. So this person's on a delay or a lag, and then you've got maybe you got the late teens or early 20s-year-old that's in the basement, hasn't done any launching, hasn't done any things, might need treatment, and then they get to you, and it's like, okay, how do we not like backpedal right back to where we were? Yeah. And it might be a cool thing. You get these guys. I assume they're coming from transitional living environments for the most part, sometimes directly from treatment coming home. Like,
I tell you what's interesting though, Todd, is like a lot of times these guys are not coming from those places. So
okay.
interestingly enough, like in I mean, I'll say 15 to 20% of cases they're either stepping up from once a week with a therapist to something more comprehensive with us, or stepping down from program to us, to maintain continuity along the continuum. But honestly, I mean, we get a lot of referrals just for guys who are looking for something different, compared to what's offered, with respect to care.
Right.
So like for us, like, I mean, our mentorship program, the way we take guys out in the community and help them do things, and sort of the teach a man to fish kind of framework. There's not a lot of supports out there, male to male, particularly in the realm of kind of clinical overlay that parents can grab a hold of. So we get a lot of like 16-year-old kids who play too many video games, who don't do anything else, who like we can just kind of like get them out in the community and like do something, which is a significant intervention for a guy like that, or we get guys who are like, super anxious about the college process and a little bit late in the game. And so like we can do a little work around like, a guy whose transcript's a little messy, who's like more your C-ish kind of guy, like that there's still an option for him around the go forward plan, whether that's community college and we ladder up, or we go straight to 4-year, or we do a vocational route. Like we want to grab a hold of the guys who, aren't the top 10 in the class and aren't going to Ivy League schools, but like they want a plan too, and they deserve
to have one.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. I wish that, like I say, we need more of it, so much more of it, because I think that those folks, I think what we see in the like emergency treatment placement, things have gotten bad and out of hand, is probably a significant portion of those guys that you're talking about that never got that at 15 or 16, and what they gravitated towards was, maybe a bad crowd, or substances that were, they might as well play video games and get high all day, or whatever. Like they gravitated to those things because they didn't have a resource that wasn't just IOP out of the local community, whatever, or a therapist who, like you say, knows how to present well, can tell you a good story and walk out and do whatever the heck they want, which they do very often. And it needs something that lives on the ground and feels like it means something. And that's what you're providing. And I wish we could orchestrate it so that it lived in school systems and it lived in other places, so that we could stop having this repetitive treatment problem that we've got in our country, which is just getting worse. Post-pandemic, worst I've ever seen. Did you see a lot of fallout from the pandemic? Like what was the deal pandemic wise for you? What did you see?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting time for us. And a really interesting time to be a business owner, for sure. Yeah, they didn't give you the rule book on that one.
No, they didn't have one.
So yeah, I mean, look, I remember actually very, very well. It was my kid's birthday. So my son's birthday was we were celebrating his birthday on the.
It must be a March baby, right?
Yeah, it was March, right? So his birthday is the 21st, but we celebrated.
Oh, mine's the 23rd.
Yeah. But we celebrated the week before, right? So on the 15th, March 15th, I took my kid out. We spent the whole day together. We had this wonderful, wonderful day. And then like the announcement came over all the things. The world is closing Monday at, 9 a.m. And so like
cut it down.
We were going, I got that news on Friday night. I had the full team online on Saturday. We flipped the whole business remote by noon on Monday. And we're running the whole operation, completely remote, completely virtual now. We had almost no virtual capabilities before, but we caught up pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so what it meant was, a couple things. One, I think, we got a pretty big spike coming out of the blocks. So like, we had this big influx of everybody was like, in the kind of crisis that we were all in. So, parents wanted to kind of shore their kids up, in that first couple of weeks. Right. And then it was like, then nobody knew how long this thing was going to go. Right. And so it was like, all right, well, let's hunker down. Right. So all the guys who just pumped right in, kind of, sort of dissipated, and people were playing the waiting game in a very sort of thoughtfully conservative kind of way. So what it amounted to really was we had a pretty significant uptick in terms of business around like the family side. So we're doing a lot of work around crisis mitigation, family work, because everybody was stuck in the house, ready to kill each other.
Right.
But not a lot of, after about month 2, there was not a lot of new business coming in, and not a lot of families were reaching back out again because no one knew how long this was going to go and to what ends. And so it was hard on the business side for a while, for sure. We made things work. Here we are. But but I for the guys like now, who were moving through it and who emerged from it, those were scary times for everybody. And I think that the people that we see, the young men that we see now, right, these, highly video game addicted, online focused, like lacking activity, school using, like these guys who are really struggling. Much of that work came out of the deficits that were, curated and cultivated in COVID.
Right.
And these guys have just never caught up. So.
Yeah. And then they're standing here in a lurch on the other side of it. And then they need somebody to help them walk through it. And I think the other thing that I see is people get in a real hurry. Like you've got parents that are, so you come out of pandemic, right? You got some grades that you failed. You got some stuff you got to shore up. And now you're sitting here and you're going back to school and you're in a lurch. And then you see parents kind of do this big, like, ladder of inference. Oh, he hasn't done this right and he hasn't done this right. And suddenly his life is going to be terrible. And we will, as parents, have failed. So like when you have to work with that, I'm always telling people, it's like, look, if he doesn't graduate on the year that the school gave him years for, so what? Let's slow down and let's be concerted about this plan that we're making for for you and your family, so that we can actually get there. Do you get a lot of pushback from families on that message? Like when you have to be like, okay, it's where's the fire? First of all, second of all, like let's just throw our destination goal out a little bit. Let's figure this out and let's cool off and slow down for a minute. Like, what's the pushback you get from parents?
A lot. Yeah, I mean, a lot. I mean, and that's not from everybody,
especially in your area. I mean,
we're in Fairfield County, Connecticut. We're in, the affluent suburbs of Hartford, Connecticut. We're in Westchester County, New York, affluent suburbs of New York City, right? So, we're getting parents with very, very high expectations. A lot of times those expectations are, just out of alignment with like what the kid has done, right? Like not maybe what he's capable of, but certainly what he's done. And I think the frustration often comes from that, if for nothing else. And so like something has to move. Something has to move. Either the expectations have to move, or the capacity and the drive and the ambition and the work ethic and all the other things on this side have to move. But I mean, I think what we try to attack first is the relationship. That the expectations are counter to the relationship, and the relationship you have with your kid is more important than anything. So right. if you want to drive a wedge between you and your kid, keep up with your lofty expectations. If you want to have a relationship that's meaningful and lifelong with your kid, maybe it makes sense to modify and adjust your expectations and actually listen to what your kid has to say.
No, it's not a series of objectives. They're a human being in front of you. Let's start there. Wow, we need a bumper sticker. Like we need a T-shirt.
Yeah, we need swag. We need gear.
We need swag. I'm going to start working on it. This has been a fantastic. I think we could, we just do a bunch more interviews and keep going, nerd out about this stuff. But I sure do appreciate you making time for being on the show today. This is Todd Weatherly with WPVM 103.7, the Voice of Asheville. Head Inside Mental Health. We'll be with you guys next time. Vince, thanks a bunch.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Todd. Really appreciate the time.
You too.
I feel so lonely and lost in lost in here. I need to find my way home. I feel so lonely and lost in here. I need to find my way home. I feel so lonely and lost in here. I need to find my way home.